Hello YouTube, this is Kyle Graves of Kyle Graves Live. There's some interesting news going on here today. Purdue Pharma tries to escape being sued by families for overdose deaths. So this is going to be a big case. They're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Purdue Pharma being one of the biggest pharmaceutical manufacturers of opioids in the nation, which has led to practically 1 million people from 2018 to now have overdosed off of drugs that they have manufactured. And they have quickly tried to file for bankruptcy so they wouldn't have to be sued. Once they file for bankruptcy and that goes through, then they couldn't be held liable for all of being sued by 1 million families, which would probably be more money than what they would get through the bankruptcy. So, I mean, they're trying to sneak this by, and the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, intervened to block the case. And so now the Supreme Court is getting involved with this case. This is huge. And this is just proof that doctors, pharmaceutical companies, they don't particularly care about you. They care about money. They care about getting you hooked on drugs for the rest of your life. So you're going up, fiending, going up to Walgreens every Saturday or Sunday, scratching, looking like Gollum. You know, trying to get your precious pills. This is their agenda for you. So we're going to go over some articles that's been on the news, and we're going to read some articles that have been published today. I mean, this is breaking news. And and you make your own decisions, or your own, take what I say and then, go with it and do your own research. But this is big, and it's proof that they're not out for your health or your well-being. They're out for your money and continuously for the rest of your life. So, let's get into it here. Let's find the first article. All right, bear with me. This is KG Live. Please like and subscribe. I would appreciate it. Trying to grow this channel. I'm still learning. But I appreciate you all for tuning in. So this is probably their Purdue Pharma's most popular drug, OxyContin. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this drug. I'm 38 right now. I probably know of about at least 10 people who have overdosed off of opioids. And this drug is very popular. And this is from the Washington Post. Democracy Dies in Darkness. It's written by David O'Valley. So the Supreme Court on Thursday put on hold a proposed bankruptcy plan for Purdue Pharma that would allocate billions of dollars to help ease the nation's opioid crisis. A plan that would also shield the family that owns the company from future lawsuits. Oh, hello. You see what they're doing? They knew what was going on. They knew what they were making. How come they didn't stop it when they saw a spike in deaths, about 10 years ago? They were making too much money. They don't care. They didn't care about the well-being and the health of Americans. They wanted all of the Americans hooked on their dope, legal dope. And they wanted pharmacists and doctors to push it. That's more money for all of them and keep you going back to the doctor. In a brief, unsigned order, the court granted the Justice Department's request to temporarily block the plan. The department is challenging whether Sackler family members, who themselves did not file for bankruptcy, can be spared from future litigation over their role in fueling the nation's crushing opioid crisis. The court agreed to review the case and consider whether U.S. Bankruptcy Code authorizes such agreements. Agreements are set for December. Purdue Pharma's bankruptcy case will unfold before the High Court as the United States continues to contend with an addiction crisis initially fueled by opioid pain pills flooding the country. Today, illicit synthetic fentanyl, which is up to 100 times stronger than morphine, is the catalyst for an overdose crisis killing more than 100,000 Americans each year. Wow. Just fentanyl. That's just one drug that's killing that many people. You know, that's not the combined of all the other different drugs, just fentanyl. Thursday's decision means settlement money meant for thousands of victims and their relatives, and for local and state governments, could be delayed. Attorney Edward Niger, who represents thousands of family members affected by the opioid crisis, called the delay disappointing for victims, but he said the expected schedule shows the Supreme Court appreciates the urgency of the matter, including the plight of the victims waiting for recovery and the terrible toll the opioid crisis at large is taking on the country. So they're trying to get over on the people. They're about to have to pay a lot more. And they're hoping that the Supreme Court wasn't going to get involved. Yeah, they're going to have to shell out a lot more coin. The appeal to the Supreme Court comes more than 2 months after the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit greenlit the bankruptcy plan, saying the Sacklers being shielded from lawsuits was needed to ensure the fair distribution of the settlement money. Does that sound a little sketch? Under the negotiated deal, the Sacklers would pay up to $6 billion over nearly 2 decades to help alleviate the crisis. The settlement plan could ultimately be worth more than $10 billion, Purdue Pharma has said. The Office of the U.S. Trustee, a branch of the Department of Justice, is challenging the lower court's decision. The Justice Department argues in its filing to the High Court that shielding the Sacklers is an abuse of the bankruptcy system, and that allowing the appellate court's decision to stand would leave in place a roadmap for wealthy corporations and individuals to misuse the bankruptcy system to avoid liability from lawsuits. Hello. Yes, this right here. Key paragraph. They're trying to get over on these people. You know, they didn't care when all these people were dying. It's just when that lawsuit came is when we care. We care now. I mean, they're drug dealers. The pusher, man. So is your doctor. So is the pharmacist. Man, they want you to come up there fiending. The Office of the U.S. Trustee, a branch of the Department of Justice, is challenging the lower court's decision. The Justice Department argues in its filing to the High Court that shielding the Sacklers is an abuse of the bankruptcy system, and that allowing the appellate court's decision to stand would leave in place a roadmap for wealthy corporations and individuals to misuse the bankruptcy system to avoid liability from lawsuits. This is a clear-cut candidate for the court's review, Solicitor General Elizabeth B. Prelogar wrote in the motion asking for a stay. Purdue Pharma, in a statement Thursday, said it was optimistic that the Supreme Court will agree in the legality of the plan. Even so, we are disappointed that the U.S. trustee, despite having no concrete interest in the outcome of this process, has been able to single-handedly delay billions of dollars in value that should be put to use for victim compensation. Opioid crisis abatement for communities across the country and overdose rescue medicines, the company said. I mean, that's a fair complaint. That's fair, but here in a couple months, they're probably going to get a lot more money. Plaintiffs say the public health crisis was fueled in part by Purdue Pharma's aggressive marketing of OxyContin, even as evidence mounted that the pills were highly addictive. Drug makers, distribution companies, and pharmacies have faced thousands of lawsuits from victims, cities and states over the toil inflicted by pain pills. The litigation has resulted in sweeping settlements and the allocation of more than $50 billion to governments across the country to help fight the opioid crisis. Purdue Pharma, facing thousands of lawsuits filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy back in 2019, but members of the Sackler family did not. 2 years later, a New York bankruptcy judge approved a negotiated deal that initially called for Sackler family members to contribute more than $4 billion while shielding them from future claims. The deal drew objections from the Justice Department and some states, which pointed out that the family had received more than $10 billion in payouts from the company. The Sacklers said nearly half of that went towards taxes. Wah! A federal district judge in December 2021 overturned the deal. After further negotiations, the Sacklers agreed to increase the payout to as much as $6 billion over 18 years to victims, survivors, and governments, including to states that previously opposed the deal. Under the bankruptcy plan, the Sackler family would relinquish control of the company, which will be refashioned as one geared solely toward easing the opioid crisis. Wow. So after you start it and make billions and billions of dollars and didn't care that all these people were dying because it was making y'all rich, only until you started to getting sued is when, we've changed. After the May appellate decision paved the way for the settlement, the Justice Department asked the High Court to pause the bankruptcy plan to prevent a piecemeal implementation involving the payout of billions of dollars over more than a decade to a vast number of claimants, including all 50 states and the district, according to its request. Purdue Pharma pointed out an overwhelming public interest in the plan, which now has all 50 states on board and 97% of almost 5,000 governmental entities voting in favor of the deal, the company said in its court filing. Attorneys representing more than 60,000 people who have claims against Purdue also opposed the government's appeal, arguing settlement money from the existing plan is desperately needed to help ease the opioid crisis. Up to $750,000 will go directly to affected families. These funds, which the Sackler family members are providing in exchange for releases, are critically needed now. The opioid epidemic continues to wreak havoc in the United States. Lawyers wrote in a filing to the Supreme Court. We're talking about only $750,000 will go to affected families. You know, they made billions. The case may help settle long-running legal conflicts over how companies use the bankruptcy system to avoid lawsuits. Ralph Brubaker, a bankruptcy law scholar at the University of Illinois College of Law, said appellate courts have for decades split on whether parties who haven't declared bankruptcy can be released from potential lawsuits through a bankruptcy reorganization. Brubaker, who has long advocated for the Supreme Court to take up the issue, believes bankruptcy code does not allow such measures, which he argues are unconstitutional and infringe on someone's right to sue. This is one of the more important and consequential issues of bankruptcy law, from both a practical and fundamental justice perspective, to ever come before the Supreme Court, Brubaker said via email on Thursday. So, I mean, this is hot news, breaking news here. Pharma knew what was going on. And so did the doctors. And so did the pharmacies. It's a vicious cycle here, you know? And these other drugs, they want you to start taking other drugs to get off the drug you're addicted to. You know, these treatments aren't cures. You know, to potentially get hooked on another drug that they're offering you. It's not as bad. I mean, they're mad because they're trying to make it sound like, oh, the families need that money now, but they can wait a couple more months for the Supreme Court to get involved. And I got a feeling it's going to be a lot more than $6 billion they're going to have to shell out. And they're upset about it. Oh, they said, oh, we paid half of that money. All the family who owns the Sackler family. Half of that money went to taxes, they said. We're innocent. So OxyContin, drugs.com. I did a little research here. And drugs associated with Purdue Pharma. So they distribute more than 12 drugs in the United States. Medications listed here may also be marketed under different names in different countries. So we have Adhangia XR. Oh, it's a stimulus. Oh, I see that meth in there. I'm not saying that it is meth, but there you go. It's got that in there. So it's some type of amphetamine stimulant. Betadine, generic name Providone iodine, antiseptic and germicides, vaginal anti-infectives. There's a lot of 304s out there that need that, but that's not what we're here for. I don't think you're going to overdose on vaginal anti-infectives, unless maybe you're from Detroit. Betasept, generic name chlorhexidine, drug class, antiseptic and germicides, mouth and throat products. Butrans, opioids, okay. Drug class. Buprenorphine. It's another opioid. Colax. You might need your laxatives, your Ducalax, Docusate. You need your laxatives after you've been doing a bunch of pills. Dexmethaphenidate. So say, I don't know this drug, but I see that key word meth in the name. When a drug's got the word meth in the name, be on the lookout for potential addiction qualities. So it says right here, it's a stimulant. You got Hyzingla ER, generic name hydrocodone opioid. And then you got OxyContin, generic name oxycodone, drug class opioids narcotic. And that has 283 reviews on here. So that's by far the most, even though this dexamethasone has 273 reviews, so it apparently is quite popular. But that's a generic, so that's, I don't know what that, what the official brand for that is that they've ripped off. But OxyContin is apparently their number one go-to. That's their number one seller. I guess that's the drug that they themselves have invented. Senocot, laxatives. So they've got a bunch of stimulants, opioids, and laxatives is what they're pushing here. And electrolytes. So stimulants, opioids, laxatives, and electrolytes is what Purdue has raked in billions and billions of dollars, causing thousands of people to die. But not just them, but also the prescribing them from doctors to the pharmacies. So who do you think is more responsible here? The drug companies who actually produce these drugs? The doctors who prescribe them? Or the pharmacies who, package them and let you know, hey, your drugs are ready, come get them? Come and get them! Gotta go get my drugs. I'll be right back. Here's another article here. Oh, got a big old pill bottle right there. Boom, that's what you want, baby. You got that blue magic. Got that OxyContin. Got what you need here at Walgreens. U.S. Supreme Court halts Purdue Pharma bankruptcy settlement pending review. Washington. The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday agreed to hear a challenge by President Joe Biden's administration to the legality of OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma's bankruptcy settlement, putting on hold a deal that would shield its wealthy Sackler family owners from lawsuits over their role in the country's opioid epidemic. The justices paused bankruptcy proceedings concerning Purdue and its affiliates and said they would hold oral arguments in December in the administration's appeal of a lower court's ruling upholding the settlement. The Supreme Court's new term begins in October. Okay. Purdue's owners, under the settlement, would receive immunity in exchange for paying up to $6 billion to settle thousands of lawsuits filed by states, hospitals, people who had become addicted, and others who have sued the Stamford, Connecticut-based company over its misleading marketing of the powerful pain medication OxyContin. You know, in my experience from people that I knew who had overdosed, that they weren't just popping it and, getting addicted to it. It's like, and them abusing it. And I don't know how that the pharmacist could regulate to where you couldn't abuse the drug. I mean, I've seen girls snorting that stuff. I mean, that's a thing. In a statement, Purdue said it was disappointed that the U.S. trustee, the Justice Department's bankruptcy watchdog, that filed the challenge at the Supreme Court, has been able to single-handedly delay billions of dollars in value that should be put to use for victim compensation, opioid crisis abatement for communities across the country, and overdose rescue medicines. I understand that giving the families of the people who overdosed some money is not going to bring their loved one back, but giving them some money, but giving people who are addicted, already addicted to opioids or stimulants, whatever, giving them another drug to take, I don't think it's the issue. Another treatment. Is that going to be a cure for their addiction? And it's big. And I have to admit, I know of more women who have died from opioid overdoses than men. But several men as well. It's powerful stuff. We are confident in the legality of our nearly universally supported plan of reorganization and optimistic that the Supreme Court will agree, the company added. The Justice Department declined to comment. At issue is whether U.S. bankruptcy law allows Purdue's restructuring to include legal protections for the members of the Sackler family who have not filed for personal bankruptcy. Oh no, they got billions in the bank. Billions. Purdue filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2019 to address its debts, nearly all of which stemmed from thousands of lawsuits alleging that OxyContin helped kickstart an opioid epidemic that has caused more than 500,000 U.S. overdose deaths over 2 decades. Just that one drug. Just that one drug. OxyContin, Xanax, bars, Loracid, what you want, what you need, hit me up, I got you, man. Come on down to Walgreens. I got that OxyContin for you, man. Purdue estimates that its bankruptcy settlement, approved by a U.S. bankruptcy judge in 2021, will provide $10 billion in value to its creditors, including state and local governments, individual victims of addiction, hospitals, and others who have sued the company. The Biden administration and 8 states challenged the settlement, but all the states dropped their opposition after the Sacklers agreed to contribute more to the settlement fund. Oh yeah, we'll drop a little bit more money in the collection plate. We're innocent. In May, the Second Circuit upheld the settlement, concluding that federal bankruptcy law allows legal protections for non-bankrupt parties like the Sacklers in extraordinary circumstances. Mm-hmm. You know it's a case when the Supreme Court gets involved. The Second Circuit ruled that the legal claims against Purdue were inextricably linked to claims against its owners, and that allowing lawsuits to continue targeting the Sacklers would undermine Purdue's efforts to reach a bankruptcy settlement. Members of the Sackler family have denied wrongdoing but expressed regret that OxyContin unexpectedly became part of an opioid crisis. We didn't know. I wonder how they tested that drug to begin with, at the very beginning. But I think we're on to something. I think they might like it. What's that old cereal commercial? Mikey likes it. He's like eating all those pills in a bowl full of OxyContin. Members of the Sackler family have denied wrongdoing, of course they have, but expressed regret that OxyContin unexpectedly became part of an opioid crisis. They said in May that the bankruptcy settlement would provide substantial resources for people and communities in need. In a court filing, the administration told the Supreme Court that Purdue's settlement is an abuse of bankruptcy protections meant for debtors in financial distress. Hello. Is what Donald Trump, what is it? It's exactly what Donald Trump did? Abused the system. And if nobody's held accountable, then it's just going to continue to happen. In a court filing, the administration told the Supreme Court that Purdue's settlement is an abuse of bankruptcy protections meant for debtors in financial distress. Not people like the Sacklers. Yeah, not people like the Sacklers with billions of dollars in the bank. According to the administration, the Sackler family members withdrew $11 billion from Purdue before agreeing to contribute $6 billion to its opioid settlement. And this is almost like, this is so bad. Like OxyContin is so bad that it's almost like if you could narrow down the government agent, the government family who created crack and then issued it to the black family, the black community, I think they're going to like it. They narrow it back down to fill in the blank. This reminds me of Dave Chappelle. The opioid pandemic. It's a pandemic, and the news and the media were all very concerned. And Dave Chappelle's like, they're concerned because they were white. Nobody was, the media and everything wasn't so up in arms and hysterical about the epidemic when it was the crack epidemic in the 80s. So Dave Chappelle's like, just say no. Drugs are bad, okay? Many other stakeholders have responded in opposition to the administration's request to halt the settlement. A group comprising more than 60,000 people who have filed personal injury claims stemming from their exposure to Purdue opioid products told the Supreme Court they support the settlement. Oh yeah, we support the settlement. Suing them for billions of dollars, including legal immunity for members of the Sackler family. Ooh. So they got the Sackler family's back here. But who is this group? Who is this group? Is this, some of those people signing a petition that you see outside the Dollar General? Who have claimed that they've filed personal injury claims from their exposure to Purdue's opioid products. How come they're going after the... I know the pharmaceutical companies are where the big money, the billions and billions and billions of dollars. But what about the thousands of doctors who have prescribed this, and who the salesmen, the salesmen and the salespeople for Purdue, who went to all of these doctors' offices pushing this drug to them, free samples. Most doctors are drug addicts, and most of doctors' children are drug dealers. In my experience, I can only speak from my personal experience. Who do you think knows more about them and has access to them and is constantly talking about them? And it's mostly rich people too. Rich people, that's where the drug dealers and who are the drug addicts are. You're poor. You don't got money for a Milky Way, much less a bag of pills, street pills, some candy, some street candy. Regardless of how one feels about the role of the Sackler family in the creation and escalation of the opioid crisis, regardless of how one feels about the role of the Sackler family in the creation and escalation of the opioid crisis, the group told the justices, the fact remains that billions of dollars in abatement and victim compensation funds hinge on confirmation and consummation of the existing plan. Well, hopefully the Supreme Court can get a better plan and grab Daddy Sackler by his ankles like Suge Knight did to Vanilla Ice, and dangle that dude outside a window, and then a bunch of gold bars and a bunch of more coins. Some Bitcoins are going to fall out. Okay. Understanding the opioid overdose epidemic. This is from the CDC, Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. The number of drug overdose deaths increased by nearly 30% from 2019 to 2020 and has quintupled since 1999. Nearly 75% of the almost 92,000 drug overdose deaths in 2020 involved an opioid. From 2019 to 2020, there were significant changes in opioid-involved death rates. Since 2020, opioid-involved death rates increased by 38%. Prescription opioid-involved death rates increased by 17%. Heroin-involved death rates increased by 7%. Synthetic opioid-involved death rates, including methadone, increased by 56%. This must be where the fentanyl comes into place. 56%. Wow, look at this chart here. Let's see if I can get this chart. Three waves of opioid overdose deaths. So here on the left here, it's saying deaths per 100,000 people. So up here, you know, we're getting into the millions here. If this is deaths, if each one of these numbers here is representing 100,000, you know, we're getting into the millions up here. The millions of people who, since 1999. So this black line here is any opioid. This purple one down here, the lowest one, so it's like, oh, it dipped down here to be the least one. And then now it's skyrocketed within, since really 2013, it's just taken off. And this is, guess what? Fentanyl. And it's also tramadol or fentanyl, prescribed or illicitly manufactured. So this purple line that you see here, the drastic up incline, the spike or whatever, that's fentanyl. And this blue line that's not as high, that's commonly prescribed opioids, natural and semi-synthetic opioids, and methadone. And all my heroes in the methadone clinic. Shout out to Kid Rock. And here's the heroin line. Even heroin's seen a spike. But fentanyl, I know several people who have accidentally overdosed on fentanyl. Young, beautiful, smart people. And this stuff is, I don't see I just didn't see I don't like barfing. And apparently a lot of these opioids make you barf uncontrollably for a while. And then you feel great. And then you just get used to barf. You get used to barfing, and then once that's over with, you feel good. But it just didn't seem appealing to me. Wave 1, rise in prescription opioid overdose deaths in 1999. Wave 2, rise in heroin overdose deaths started in 2010. And then now we see the Wave 3, 2013, the rise in synthetic overdose deaths, fentanyl. That was a good line chart. From 1999 to 2020, more than 564,000 people died from an overdose involving an opioid, including prescription and illicit opioids. This rise in opioid overdose deaths can be outlined in 3 distinct waves. The first wave began with the increased prescribing of opioids in the 1990s, with an overdose death involving prescription opioids increasing since at least 1999. The second wave began in 2010. And the third wave in 2013, fentanyl. That's what that line graph was showing. All right, here, what do we do? Combating the opioid overdose epidemic. Wow, did you see that? Does that map pop up? That map, 187 people die every day from opioids. The CDC is committed to fighting the opioid overdose epidemic and supporting states and communities as they continue to work to identify outbreaks, collect data, respond to overdoses, and provide care to those in their communities. Overdose Data to Action is a 4-year cooperative agreement through which the CDC funds health departments in 47 states, Washington, D.C., 2 territories, and 16 cities and countries for surveillance and prevention efforts. These efforts include timelier tracking of non-fatal and fatal drug overdoses, improving toxicology to better track polysubstance-involved deaths, enhancing linkage to care for people with opioid use disorder and risk for opioid overdose, improving prescription drug monitoring programs, implementing health systems interventions, partnering with public safety, and implementing other innovative surveillance and prevention activities. The CDC work focuses on monitoring trends to better understand and respond to the epidemic, advance research, collecting and analyzing data, building state, local, and tribal capacity, supporting providers, healthcare systems, and payers, partnering with public safety officials and community organizers, collaboration, and increasing public awareness. And part of this is public awareness that the manufacturers of these drugs are trying to get away with not being sued, and getting that out there. And how do you checks and balances, And saying here collaboration is essential for success in preventing opioid overdose deaths. Medical personnel, emergency departments, first responders, public safety officials, mental health and substance use treatment providers. It said it's treatment, it's not cure providers. Community-based organizations, public health, and members of the community all bring awareness, resources, and expertise to address this complex and fast-moving epidemic. Together, we can better coordinate efforts to prevent opioid overdose and death. Collaboration is essential. I think checks and balances also could be more essential to prescribing, manufacturing, and prescribing these drugs. Because, the pharmacies, they're just going off the doctor's orders. They have the drugs. They're just putting them in a bag and calling them up saying, come and get them. Dinner's ready. It's more on the doctors than it is the pharmacies, because they're legally just taking their order, filling an order, and, order's ready, come pick it up through the drive-thru. They made it to where you can go get your pills as easy as you can a pizza. Hot and ready. Your pills are ready. My blue magic. I'll be right back. I was getting low. But as far as doctors being able to skate and get around with, prescribing the drug and getting them hooked on it, man, might need that for life. Keep coming back. Go see the doctor on a regular basis. But you see the cycle that the companies, the pharmaceutical companies, they're doing all these test trials to find the most addictive drug possible to get everybody addicted on it, to where they're constantly going back to the doctor. And he's constantly writing prescriptions to the pharmacy. You see how they're all involved, and it's gotten down to so good that there's legal drug dealers on every corner in America. America loves their drugs, baby. Let's see what CNN has to think about it here.
In our Healthly, the Supreme Court has blocked Purdue Pharma, the manufacturer of OxyContin, from going forward with bankruptcy proceedings and a $6.6 billion settlement. This was part of an arrangement that would ultimately offer the Sackler family, the founders of Purdue Pharma, broad protection from opioid-related civil claims. The Supreme Court.
Let's see if they talk about how, the Sackler family got $11 billion before they filed for bankruptcy.
The court says they will now take up this case and hear arguments about it in December. Let's bring in CNN's Gene Casares and Joan Biskupic. Gene, what exactly was in this settlement?
Well, first of all, when it began in 2019, when the bankruptcy was declared by Purdue Pharma, all of the civil suits, and there were so many around the country against the Sacklers, against Purdue Pharma, they all were channeled into the bankruptcy action. That was one of the first things they did. And people need to realize how huge this was. This involved states, this involved counties, this involved townships, this involved tribal nations all over the country. And I remember being in the courtroom, and it was filled with attorneys by phone all over the country. So they started negotiating. They've been negotiating for years on this, since 2019, and they finally determined, and there was a handful of states that were opposed to this, but it was really symbolically at the end, they decided that what would happen is that the Sacklers would pay out approximately $6 billion to individual claimants, to states, to abatement procedures involving crisis medications that could be given to people. And in lieu of that, and their names would be taken off buildings around the country also, that was part of it. But in lieu of that, they would not face civil suits going forward because the monies would be going toward everything that I just described. And here's the impact of this. Those people that were the victims and that they wanted money, and $6 billion is going to all of that, this will be stopped in its tracks. So no one, no community, no abatement proceedings, no medications will be going for the short term to those entities that so need it.
Joan, are you surprised that the...
Hold on, they need more drugs? I think the problem is that we don't need any more drugs. Now, they will get the money here in a couple months. But here's the issue. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't need my opioids anymore, but I need another drug that gets me high, that gets me effed up. That the treatment facilities might not be that might need to be reorganized and addressed as well. It's like, so how exactly where is all this $6 billion going to, and how is it being allocated or spread around? One thing to the families for the people who've already overdosed, they get a lump sum of money. My heart goes out to every family who's lost a loved one in the opioid epidemic. But as far as the people who are just addicted to it, there's got to be a better way to get them sober than giving them another drug.
The U.S. Supreme Court has not only blocked this settlement that had been agreed upon, but that they're also going to take up the case.
Well, Jake, those are pretty dramatic terms that Gene just outlined, and the Solicitor General of the United States actually used them in her arguments to try to get the Supreme Court to intervene, to say this is a very exceptional agreement, unprecedented. The scope of it is something that, maybe should be blocked. And in encouraging the justices to take it up, say, look at lower courts are divided out there on situations when parties can be released from liability. So it is, in some ways, it's surprising that they're intervening at this stage, but this is the most crucial stage, and they have set it on a pretty fast track. They've ordered a fairly quick briefing schedule, and the case would be heard in early December with a resolution, Jake, probably by the end of June of next year. So, it's when you think of the opioid addiction crisis in America and the responsibility of Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, this is a pretty unprecedented settlement. So that's why the Supreme Court has intervened at this point, Jake.
Man, the Sackler family's trying to get their bag and run. Down to the islands. They're trying to get their bag and run. And the Supreme Court was like, wait a minute. I think I might have to open up that wallet a little bit more. The jaws of life on that wallet. On those Bitcoins y'all been stacking up over the last 10 years.
All right, Joan Biskupic and Gene Casares, thanks. Let's bring in the Attorney General of Ohio, Dave Yost. Ohio is one of the 8 states, as well as Washington, D.C., that are part of the $6 billion settlement. And you might remember Ohio is, of course, tragically one of the epicenters of the opioid crisis. General Yost, thanks for joining us. Did you want the Supreme Court to take up the case, or did you want them to allow the settlement to move forward?
We wanted the settlement to move forward. This is money that's not flowing to individual claimant families. It's not coming back, equally important, to our communities and to our states to fight back against this avalanche of addiction that was architected by the Sacklers.
What is I'm going to ask you a question I haven't asked anybody before. What's the best argument for the people who disagree with you? The best argument being made by, for instance, the Solicitor General, people who want the Supreme Court to review this case, they disagree with the settlement. I realize I'm asking you to state something you don't agree with, but what is their best case?
Man, he said it was architected by the Sacklers, So, here's an expert saying that they knew what they were doing. They're trying to get everybody hooked. They saw those test monkeys in there fiending for that drug. And they're like, oh, yeah. We can't wait to get this to the people of Ohio and around the world. We're going to make a ton of money.
Case.
Well, I think there's probably 2 arguments on the other side. The first is that there's a lack of due process in the discharging. That is just fundamentally unfair to let the Sacklers walk away. The problem with that is that under the law, we can get to Purdue Pharma. The individual family money that's behind that is much more difficult legally in most of our states. The other issue, which is kind of a policy issue, is what do we do with these mass torts that are so massive? They're existential lawsuits. And to maximize the recovery for the wrongs done, you have to have some kind of means of marshaling all these claims. And this is going to be an interesting argument at the Supreme Court.
And your argument is, correct me if I'm wrong, there are people in Ohio and the other states who need help now, who need that money now, organizations that need to help people who are still suffering in this epidemic that continues to take thousands of lives a year. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. And as the Court of Appeals said, bankruptcy is a creature of compromises. It's a messy process of competing interests.
We've seen some preliminary data showing that drug overdose deaths have leveled off, but still more than 100,000 Americans losing their lives from overdoses nationally, most of them, I believe, opioids. How is Ohio working to alleviate the crisis?
Well, we have a coalition, we call it the One Ohio Foundation, that has all of our local governments and the state government. We're sharing the money from these various lawsuits to bring it back to the local level for treatment, for prevention, for enforcement, because this war is fought on the ground of our streets, of our cities and our counties, and it's so important to get this money flowing. It's been since 2019 that this bankruptcy proceeding's been going on. I guess the best thing I can say about today's decision to hear the case is at least they set it for December.
Yeah. Can you imagine if terrorists killed 100,000 Americans a year? But this is us doing it to ourselves. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost, thank you so much for your time. As always, we appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
This news.
Yeah, it's interesting that they set it for December, so there's going to be a lot of families are going to get a check for Christmas. It's just trying to hold, it seems like everybody's, the lowest man on the totem pole seems to always, he's the one that always gets held accountable. He's the standard, but yet here you go, the person who's at the very top, the founder, they skate free for the most part. Even the president evading taxes, filing for bankruptcy. You think Donald Trump was doing what the Sacklers, Donald Trump did what the Sacklers were trying to do, and then they're like, not so fast. But Donald Trump didn't, produce a mass murdering, heavily addicting drug, but similar as far as filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So many people are getting away with it, and maybe this will be the beginning of holding incredibly wealthy people accountable, like, the majority of the 99.5 or greater % of Americans out here. Well, this is just a landslide, not just, really it's a landslide victory for Americans. I mean, this is the beginning of holding pharmacies and the families who created the company, the pharmaceutical companies accountable. I mean, and then come December, they're going to be getting a lot more than $6 billion. So is this going to change pharma? Or are they going to find some other loopholes to get around evading responsibility? Time will tell. But this is overall, I think this is a step forward in the right direction for America. And let me know what you think about it. Please like and subscribe. Hit that bell for more notifications. I appreciate you all very much. You can leave a message in the comment, or you can email me at kjg0623.com for any type of information, or if you're interested, wanting me to do a vlog about a specific topic, I'm taking requests. All right, YouTube, take it easy.